Hello, my name is Darren Thomas and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at self-assessment and ways that you can use it as a teacher with your students. So this particular presentation is a little bit more complex, so I wanted to provide an outline of what to expect as we go through our journey here. So we're going to take a look at the pros and cons of self-assessment, the good and the bad, if you will. Then we will take a look at different types of self-assessment. There's actually 4 in this video. And lastly, we will take a look at how you as the teacher can support students when they are doing self-assessment. So here are some pros and cons of self-assessment. First, with the pros, self-assessment, in other words, encouraging students to judge themselves and to analyze their own progress, encourages autonomy, also known as, independence. Self-assessment also enhances critical thinking because students have to judge where they are at and where they are trying to go. And lastly, self-assessment often helps to motivate students because they are determining where they are going and what they are trying to do. Now, there is a problem with self-assessment, and one of the common problems is subjectivity. How do you judge improvement? How do you judge when a student is not progressing as they should? This requires people to use their opinion, which is not a bad thing, but again, 2 people, 2 opinions. And so at times, self-assessment can be criticized in that you have to, it becomes subjective, and also it's difficult to compare students as they are just looking at how their own progress is going. Now, there are 4 types of self-assessment: goal setting, performance assessment, general assessment, and student-made tests. And we're going to take a look at each one of these. Let's begin with goal setting. Goal setting is when the students decide or are deciding for themselves what they want to do or achieve. So the students decide, I want to improve this. It might be, I want to improve my vocabulary, or I want to improve my public speaking ability, whatever. What's happening here is that the students lay down the criteria and attempt to achieve it. So if they're trying to improve the vocabulary, they say, I want to learn these 5 words, and then they assess themselves on whether or not they learned the 5 words. And they're able to decide for themselves if they are progressing and achieving their goals. What's happening here is that the student is deciding for themselves how they are going to achieve the goal, rather than you as the teacher providing that for them in advance, which is very common in education. A second one is performance assessment. Students judging how they did on a specific task. So a student might want to judge how they, if you look at the picture, how they perform on the saxophone. How do they do with their performance? Or maybe the student wants to look at how they performed on the football field or in the weight room, whatever. The student decides for themselves that I'm going to judge myself on this particular trait, and I'm going to measure how well I do on this. In other words, they may not necessarily pick the task. They may not necessarily pick the goal. However, their job is to determine how well am I doing at this particular thing. This is why it's slightly different from the previous slide where we talked about goal setting. This is number 3 here, is general assessment. This is very similar to our last one, performance assessment, but the student is judging their progress over time. So for example, when you do, like I said, the previous one, performance assessment, it might be where you perform the task one time. Whereas with general assessment, you might do the task several times over several days, several hours, several weeks, whatever. Or it might be, you might be looking at the progress towards a goal over time. This is our examples of general assessment where it's longitudinal in terms of how you rate how you're doing, rather than, for example, cross-sectional for those of you who are familiar with ideas involving research. And the last one we have here is student-made tests. And so I think this is self-explanatory. The students determine for themselves how they will be assessed for an exam or whatever. Now, the advantage of this is, again, going back to one of the pros that is commonly related with self-assessment, and that is critical thinking. In order for the student to develop a test, they must determine what they know, be able to figure out how to ask a question about that, and then provide the answer. They also must determine what they do not know, and to generate questions about that, or to at least know to avoid asking questions about those particular topics. Again, this requires a lot of metacognitive skills that is often neglected in general education. Now, I wanted to provide you, as we close this, with 3 things that you might want to consider to support students as they are doing self-assessment. Number 1 is that you need to, as the teacher, clearly define what needs to be done. So if the students are setting a goal, you need to say the goal needs to be related to such and such topic. Try to set boundaries in which the students can have their autonomy. Complete freedom often leads to complete chaos. So some sort of a sense of a boundary about where the students can explore can help to improve the assessment. Number 2, you want to consider the format. So, are they going to make a rubric for themselves? Are they going to make questions? How are they going to develop their goals? Is it going to be bullets? Do they have to give themselves points, etc.? What do the students have to do to provide evidence that they have achieved or not achieved whatever goals or whatever tasks they're trying to do? And lastly, you want to challenge the student's assessment. Frequently, students can be very critical of their progress, and so as the teacher, it's not necessary to disagree with their assessment, but rather to ask questions about how did they come to that point? What evidence do they have to justify whatever score or whatever comments they have about their performance? Often students will react emotionally and will start to say many, many negative things, but when you start to explore it, there was no support, there was no strength behind the conclusion that they were making. And so this is where you as the teacher want to try to get them to think about their position, about their performance. So in this particular video, we focused on the different types of self-assessment that are available. And there are 4 common ones. There are many more we could talk about, but in this video, we talked about goal setting, performance, general assessment, and student-made tests. So I want to thank you for watching. My name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you for watching.